Welcome everyone to ArtIAMAS seminar series co-organized by UMBC, UMCP, and Army Research Lab. We are fortunate to have Dan Kunitz as today's speaker. He is the director of UMD Venture Strategy and Development Center at University of Maryland College Park. And the title of his talk today is the Innovation Core. Let me quickly introduce Dan. Dan joined University of Maryland in 2019 as a professional track faculty in the Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute in the Clark School of Engineering. Dan is a co-PI and director of the NSF-funded Mid-Atlantic I-Corps Hub, supporting innovation and entrepreneurship programs for university researchers. Dan is also a PI and director of the EDF-funded Maryland Innovation Extension, supporting HBCUs and researchers and technology entrepreneurs from underrepresented groups throughout Maryland. Dan is an instructor in NSF National I-Corps program and has taught various courses related to entrepreneurship programs for researchers throughout the region, as well as nationally and internationally. Before joining UMD, Dan was in a similar role at the George Washington University as director of I-Corps program for the NSF I-Corps node and as a co-PI of Greater Washington's NSF I-Corps sites. He has also been a senior advisor to NSF National Innovation Network, where he chaired several curriculum initiatives. At UMD, Dan has been involved in several task forces and work groups to connect the innovation ecosystem on campus and throughout the region. So without further ado, Dan, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. And I'm pleased to be here. Let me ask you, because I haven't been to one of these seminars in a little while, so I don't remember too well. Is it okay if I kind of go off script? There's only a couple people here who I don't know. And I'd like to make this a little more conversational because it's such a small group. Or were you hoping to have something more formal so that we could record it and have other people watch it?
That's fine, Dan. Whatever way you want to organize that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna go off script here and call an audible at the line, just because I know all but two people. And so I want to ask the two who I don't know for a quick introduction, if that's okay. If you don't mind chiming in. And so that would be Tim and Jesse are the two who I don't know, and I'm curious to hear what brings you here and your connection or interest in I-Corps so I can be sure to tailor things accordingly. So Tim, I saw you come off camera, maybe you can start.
I'm Tim Flanner. I'm a professor in computer science and electrical engineering at UMBC. And I just think it's a good program, and I'd like to understand a little better about how people at our university can take advantage of it. My own areas of research primarily orbit around AI, language understanding, knowledge graphs, and knowledge representation and reasoning.
Wonderful. That's great. We can definitely sort of explain a little more about I-Corps, talk about how to engage, and you'll hear from some people here who come from similar backgrounds to you, different but related, and have been through I-Corps and can talk about sort of how it informed their research and what they experienced. Jesse, would you like to chime in?
Sure. My name is Jesse. I'm a recent UMD grad and a researcher at Army Research Lab. And I'm here because, amongst other things, as a side interest, I've become more interested in innovation networks and their dynamics, talking to a cognitive scientist friend of mine. So the abstract just looked interesting and was posted in our channel like 30 minutes ago. So I figured I'd stop by.
Wonderful. Happy to have you. I think the rest of us are here as either sort of members of the University of Maryland I-Corps team or panelists and members of ArtIAMAS, ArtIAMAS investigators who have participated or have experience in I-Corps. So I think I would like to keep it kind of concise. I've shared some slides, but I'm going to walk through them kind of quickly so that I can turn the floor over to the panelists and they can engage Tim and Jesse especially and just talk sort of, I think, casually about your experiences in I-Corps, if that's okay. If anybody wants to interrupt me or ask a question or change the flow of things at any point, don't hesitate. I'm not as experienced with WebEx. I'm not sure if I'll see activity in the chat, but you can just unmute and chime in because there's a small number of us. Also, Glenn Hellman, who's on my team here, will monitor the chat and can interrupt me if he sees something he wants me to stop. So let me try sharing my screen. And let's see. Glenn, just because you're the last person I saw, I'll ask you, can you see my screen okay? Oh, I see some thumbs up from Namalia. Perfect. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to keep my remarks concise. I'm going to skip through a few things. But if you want me to expand, just unmute and ask me. So my proposed agenda is I'm going to give you a very quick overview of I-Corps, sort of the structure and history of the program. I'll keep it to 5 minutes or so. I-Corps is built on a process, a methodology called Lean Startup. And I'll talk about that. I'll also keep that pretty short, 5 minutes, 10 tops. I want to try to quickly get to the panel of ArtIAMAS investigators who have I-Corps experience and hear from them directly. And then I'll close by talking a little more about how you can engage and what we're planning for those of you who want to consider joining I-Corps, participating in some way. That'll be it. So I'm going to skip through this quickly and just talk broadly, conceptually, about sort of why I do the kind of work I do and why I-Corps is connected to ArtIAMAS. There is this sort of phenomenon that those of us who work in commercialization are well aware of, and those of us who work in innovation, about this gap or this valley of death between research and entrepreneurship and commercial and the commercial world, where the resources available to us as researchers, as we are developing commercializable technologies, the resources become fewer and fewer as we go down the R&D path, left to right on my screen. It isn't until you jump into being a viable commercial entity that you start to get access to more resources through loans and funds and revenue. So we used to try to bring people from industry to our campuses to see what we're working on campus, see the value of it, and try to bridge the gap that way. And NSF conceptualized about 10 years ago of this program that ultimately became I-Corps, of a way to more proactively push our researchers out into engaging with industry, proactively listening, solving their problems, and really tailoring solutions to very specific market needs. This was inspired largely by a well-known sort of founder of the Lean Startup movement named Steve Blank, who was doing a lot of really innovative work at Stanford around teaching technology startups. And NSF, National Science Foundation, partnered with Steve Blank to develop the I-Corps program in 2011. So the program is entrepreneurial training for researchers with the specific goal of orienting researchers to understanding and solving real-world problems in a real granular level of detail, unlike what's been done before. Hopefully increasing the odds of success of those who participate and the impact of any success that you have if you commercialize. So to do that, they have created 5 hubs around the country. This is National Science Foundation, created 5 hubs, which are consortia of research universities that deliver I-Corps programs in their region. And you'll see that we are the second one down in the bar on the right side of my screen, the Mid-Atlantic Hub, that's led by me at the University of Maryland. And we work with all of these other schools throughout the Mid-Atlantic. So specifically the ones listed here in Pennsylvania, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina, and also many that are not listed here that want to be involved in I-Corps in some way. We collaborate with all of them, and we run a lot of programs together. So that's sort of a background for the work that I do sort of in my main day job. We also have created what we call the Maryland Innovation Extension. It's a program that works primarily with HBCUs in the state of Maryland, Bowie State, Coppin State, Morgan State, and University of Baltimore. And we have funding from the EDA and from TEDCO and from UMB's Baltimore Fund to scale some of our programs, primarily I-Corps, to a broader range of audiences. So we're working throughout the Mid-Atlantic, and we're also working throughout Maryland specifically to run the programs that I'm about to describe. And then, of course, we're also working very deliberately, intentionally with this program, with Artemis and with ARL, UMBC, and all the folks who are involved in this. We also have funding to sort of tailor specific programs to Artemis investigators. Just real quick, the way we run the programs, we have what we call Regional I-Corps, which is a fairly short and simple introduction to the methodology. There is a program called National I-Corps or NSF I-Corps, where investigators get $50,000 grants to participate. You have to do Regional I-Corps first, then you can do National I-Corps, and that positions you very, very well to go after the best non-dilutive money out there for technology startups, SBIRs. Here in Maryland, TEDCO's MII is a great opportunity, AFI-AIR and other funding mechanisms as well. All of them, I-Corps has demonstrated a very significant increase in your chances of winning those awards, very significant, like literally tripling your chances of getting those awards if you've done I-Corps, because you'll have such a more compelling, convincing, detailed commercialization plan as part of your proposal. So I-Corps has been shown to have great success. I'll share these slides with you later. I don't need to belabor it, but many, many startups that go through it have raised significant amount of money and had a lot of good success. The American Innovation Competitiveness Act that was passed in Congress about 6 years ago recognized I-Corps success and said it should be spread to all federal agencies, not just National Science Foundation. Everybody should benefit from it. So every other lab in agency in the country with a significant R&D budget is adopting I-Corps in one way or another. They're either partnering with National Science Foundation or replicating it on their own. And I've been involved in a bunch of these. I can answer questions about it. Recently, the National Science Foundation created a new directorate called TIP. I-Corps moved into the TIP directorate, and it's just another sort of testament to how important these programs are and how much support they have in Congress. They gave NSF a ton of money to stand up a series of new programs and funding opportunities around innovation, and I-Corps sort of slides into that. And this has also become really popular elsewhere around the world. This isn't immediately relevant to the folks here, but other countries are looking at the success of I-Corps and replicating it and adopting it as well. And I've been involved in a bunch of these sort of on a personal level. So that is my very quick overview of sort of the nuts and bolts and history of I-Corps. Good opportunity to jump in and ask a question if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about the methodology and the content of what you would actually do in I-Corps before turning it over to our panelists. So I'll spend about 5 more minutes on this. Again, interrupt me anytime if you want. But I-Corps is all about asking smart questions. And I-Corps itself in the Lean Start methodology is based on a couple really insightful, interesting questions. One of them is, what is a startup? And I-Corps is designed to help startups. And so understanding what is it exactly that we want to help, who is it that we want to help, what defines a startup is a really interesting first question to be really precise about who we're serving and how. And we draw this distinction when we think about the answer between a startup being a smaller temporary organization, not necessarily a company, not necessarily a legal entity, but a small team, a group that is trying to accomplish something, that's looking for a model. And so once we realize that startups are distinctly different from existing companies, that they're in a search mode, not an execution mode, then we think very differently about how we train them and what they need to do. Because companies, there's a lot of great research around how to build a company and how to improve a company, but that doesn't all necessarily apply to a startup, which has a fundamentally different goal. Also, if we're trying to get startups to succeed, the question of, well, why do they not succeed? Why do startups fail? Becomes really, really relevant. And there's been a lot of great research around this, especially in the last 10, 20 years, more than ever before. And so it has led to a whole new way of thinking about how do we avoid these mistakes. The number one reason startups fail is because they build a product for which there is no market need. And that is consistent among many, many studies that have been done in many different contexts with large sample sizes. And sometimes it's worded a little differently, building something that nobody wants, lack of product market fit, no market need. but the underlying number one reason by a long shot is this no market need, lack of product market fit. And so you develop this new paradigm when you think through the ramifications of this research and these insights of separating search from execution, being sure that you're searching for a business model before you execute, and that you're searching specifically for something that has a need in the market to avoid that problem of building something that no one wants. So we're built on this principle that you must not fool yourself, because we know from experience that many startups continue to launch building something that people don't want, for which there's no market need. And of course, they think there's a need, they assume there's a market, but they realize after they get there that there isn't. And so they're fooling themselves in some way. And we want to avoid that mistake with I-Corps, and we want to be really rigorous and deliberate about it. So we know there's also a lot of research around confirmation biases that we bring into our activities. The more time we spend doing something, the more we invest ourselves in it, emotionally, personally, literally, and we value it and we overvalue it, and other people don't always see it that way. So we like to just wipe the canvas clean, start with a blank slate, and assume that we don't know what the market needs, and go out and figure it out and build a model from the ground up. So the way we do that, and this is a direct quote from a name that you'll recognize, we look for a new law by making guesses, computing the consequences, comparing it to the results of our experiments. And if those experiments fail, then it's wrong. And that simple statement is the key to science. And it doesn't matter how smart you are or who made the guess. If it disagrees, it's wrong. That's all there is to it. It's another Richard Feynman quote, someone who's inspired a lot of the methodology behind the scientific method, and the best extent we can, tailoring that approach of hypothesis testing to business models and the search for business models. So we have this model that we describe more when you get to I-Corps on the left of my screen, which is sort of your laboratory notebook for developing hypotheses around your business model. We have this process of going out and interviewing prospective customers and doing it in a really deliberate, methodical way, testing those hypotheses. And if you do just one, if you just work with I-Corps instructors in a classroom, you'll learn some things and you'll make some progress. And if you just go talk to people, but you do it without a deliberate approach, you'll also probably learn some interesting things. But if you do it in a really rigorous, iterative way, where you develop a hypothesis, you go and you test it with interviews, and then you come back and you revise your hypotheses, you learn from them, and then you go and test them again. You keep doing these sprints, you will make a lot of progress. That's what we do in our programs. So we develop hypotheses, we test them with interviews in the field with prospective partners, key stakeholders from our ecosystem. We create what's called a business model. I can explain that more. And we do it in these really intense, immersive experiences that are kind of like replicating the startup environment for a short amount of time. And we wrap a lot of expert mentoring around it. People who are involved in delivering these programs are practitioners. They are primarily technology entrepreneurs. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I know that was fast. Hopefully it made sense. I'm happy to answer more questions about it. But I wanted to turn it over and just have a conversation with Utsav and Abhishek, with John Krupe, and with Derek Paley, to hear about their experiences in I-Corps. And again, it's a small group here, so we can keep it informal. Certainly don't need slides if you don't want. But I was hoping each one of you could jump in and just, I know you all had a good experience and are fans of the program. I wasn't really looking for a testimonial as much as I was sort of more tangible outcomes. What were the learnings that you had going through I-Corps? How did it impact your research? How did it impact the trajectory of whatever commercialization path you were on? So if any one of you who wants to jump in and start, Utsav, I think I saw you kind of off camera first. So you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So hello everyone, I'm Utsav Patel. So I was a master's student in robotics at the University of Maryland, and I have been doing research on various learning-based navigation technologies for ground mobile robots under Professor Dinesh Manocha. And we develop various technologies which can enable robot to operate in very crowded public places. And during our research, we got a lot of interest from companies that they are interested in deploying our technology on their robots. So it gave us a hint that maybe there is a commercial potential for our technology. And then, like for the past 2 years, we are trying to commercialize our technology through a startup. So the first thing that we did was to participate in UMD I-Corps. So it was back in August 2020. And the idea was that maybe we can sell a complete software as a package and it can run on any robot and make it autonomous. So we did initial interviews and we found that, okay, there is not like a big enough market to form a startup. And then we participated in National I-Corps program where we started with an idea of developing a retail a delivery robot for indoor environments. And I think we conducted more than 100 interviews in that direction. So that helped us to get MIA phase 1, NSF SBR phase 1, and it also helped us to develop new technologies which we never considered in the past. So in a way, I-Corps was the best thing that ever happened to our team.
That's awesome. I have questions for you, but why don't we get a quick intro from the others, and then I'll sort of ask the questions of all of you. So John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I'm John Krupe. I'm CEO of Kick Robotics, and we're a very new startup, just turned 2 years old. And we basically build autonomous robots that will work in groups and take in situ measurements in soil, air, water, and we have a office at the end of University of Maryland near the airport, and we are pretty much exclusively have interns and graduates from the University of Maryland Robotics Department. So we've always been really excited about the team and the group. My background, I've been in startups, many startups, and I've been in startups where, as CTO, where we've gotten tens of millions of dollars from VCs with the PowerPoint presentation that we've done a few times. And it's, they bet in the team, but ultimately we had an idea and we pitched it and said the general market and kind of said, we think this is our customer base, and then built it. And then 2 years later, when it's built, you go and get your customers, and it's small startups fight, and some of them fight for years on who are they, who's their market, who are they going after, what are they building, and all these things. And we did that many times. When I enrolled in I-Corps, I just couldn't believe that, we've just done it wrong for so many years. And so the whole idea, and actually we kind of did Kick Robotics like this. We wanted to really build purposeful robots and really understand the target areas and build robots for that. So we enrolled in I-Corps and really participated heavily as we were building the company, and really took what was being taught and did it, and doing customer discovery. And it's really good. It's actually a little hard to talk to a customer and ask them questions about their pains without them knowing really what you're doing. But it's really good insight, not only in finding out if they're interested, the buyer and all these things, but also it may lead you into who the real customer base may be. So it's really, it's just really a valuable program to be in. And I would almost mandate it for any startup that gets any funding, have to go through it.
Awesome. Again, I got some questions for you. I appreciate the testimonial. I want to hear a little more detail about some of the lessons that you learned. But Derek, maybe I can hear from you first.
Yeah, so thanks, Dan, and for participating. Thanks, Nirmalia, for setting this up. My name is Derek Paley. I'm the director of the Maryland Robotics Center. I'm the PI of ArtIAMAS. I'm also a faculty member in aerospace engineering in the Institute for Systems Research. So I participated in I-Corps a few times over the years with varying degrees of involvement. Many years ago, I had a postdoc do the regional I-Corps with, I would say, fairly limited success, just due to the level of engagement just wasn't really there. And that was for a commercialization concepts pertaining to aerospace vehicles. More recently, I guess just prior to the pandemic, if I remember correctly, I think it was January 2020. I did a regional I-Corps with a couple of students in the area of micromobility. And for that one, I was much more engaged, and we got the 20 interviews, and we got the ticket to the National I-Corps with NSF, and we did 100 more interviews, all on Zoom in August 2020. And that was really, really a great experience. And I think the philosophy of evidence-based customer discovery, has definitely permeated my research and how I think about, what problems to work on, and how to make sure we're working on impactful problems, whether or not they're going to yield intellectual property and actual commercialization potential. Just last month, had 2 student groups go through regional I-Corps. Unfortunately, I was overcommitted and I couldn't really participate that much with either group. I was a little underwhelmed to see, I think the one team got to 3 interviews and the other got to 7. And I thought, boy, wow, the regional I-Corps, they're really going easier on the students these days, because it used to be you would get shamed / bullied into doing all 20 of your interviews. So I was kind of surprised that the students got off the hook so easily. But at least with one of those groups, I'm going to make them finish their 20 interviews this fall, because it's a group from the Gemstone program on the University of Maryland campus. And they're sophomores, and they're going to be working on this project until they graduate. So I want to make sure they pick something that actually has impact. So this is the semester they're supposed to do a quote unquote literature review, but I've encouraged them to think of the literature review actually as going out and talking to people, because that's the only way they're going to figure out where the problems are, where the pains and gains are. And they seem to have adopted that mindset. That's my hope. It's a group of 8 or 9 students. Only 2 or 3 of them actually did the I-Corps program. So I'm hoping that those 2 or 3 can kind of permeate the group with the philosophy that they're going to need to go out and just talk to people and figure out and test their hypothesis about what would be impactful research to spend the next 3 years of their life working on. So that's it for me. Thanks.
All right, Derek, we can debrief on those two student teams offline another time. But let me ask the 3 of you to share a nugget with Jesse or Tim about a specific interview that you did or hypothesis you tested where you learned something that you weren't expecting. Just because you were all in this space broadly of robotics and sort of in closely related fields. The kinds of interviews you were doing are, related to each other and probably related to some of the research that they're interested in or the projects that they're working on. Can you think of one thing where you went into an interview thinking one thing and you heard something unexpected?
Yeah, I could give it a shot. We had a few of these. In particular, we were when there were the wildfires in both California and Australia, were really really intense. We happened to see somebody from Australian Wildfire Technology Alliance in Australia quoted in the Wall Street Journal, and looked him up on LinkedIn, sent a message to him, and got an interview with him. And this was during I-Corps, and we wanted to test the hypothesis of using multiple robots for early warning detection for wildfires, and felt that he would have a good insight into Australia because they were going through this. So we asked him a whole bunch of questions, and asked him from the perspective of what what are they looking for in terms of detecting fires, and what are they doing to mitigate the risks and all these things. And what he said was because he represented technology companies, he thought that they would really say, we need technology to have early warning indicators of these fires, and more information about robots and other technologies could be helpful, because he quoted saying some of the things like that in Wall Street Journal. But what we found out when he started interviewing the fire departments, that they were only concerned with the safety of the firefighters. And then when you go up to the counties and the districts, they were interested in the readiness and the welfare of the firefighters. And he said it kept going up, and finally Parliament was created a royal council to investigate using technologies for early wildfire detection. So, and then he said this, and so what this means essentially is that if it bubbles all the way up to the top, to Parliament, and then goes down, that who's the buyer and who the pain points are is just not, it's not achievable for a startup to be able to go after something like this. And so it gave us good indication, something that sounds good on paper, send a bunch of robots out, use all different type of, sensors and everything, collaborate together. But in fact, the reality was they were struggling with so many other things before that, there was nobody even really looking at the investment in technology. So we just said, this is good to know, and it's probably not a use case of space that we're going to attack.
Yeah, but when you read headlines, you think that there's a clear need here, right? I mean, there's clearly, you could solve a big problem, but a specific path to market, it just seemed like it's a long ways off in Australia.
And then we found out this is the same in other places. So that's the thing. It looks really good on paper, but then when you really start investigating, you see, really where the pain is, who's responsible for it, who's the buyer, if there is a buyer. And then you can, a lot of times, if you talk to the right people, just kind of rule out that, it's going to be a long haul to get into this market. So you may want to rethink it.
Awesome. Thank you. Utsav, do you have something?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, like we were working on a solution. So initially, when we participated in the National I-Corps program, we were doing a lot of exploratory interviews in different industries and trying to understand where this technology can be the most useful. So during our exploratory phase, we started speaking in the airport industry, and I remember one interview with the Chief Innovation Officer at CVG International Airport, and we were trying to talk about, like, can this technology be deployed on scrubbing robots, the cleaning robots, because a lot of airports are deploying cleaning robots to clean the huge spaces. But he suggested that, like, maybe in a year or so, if you can develop indoor delivery robot to deliver food to the travelers at their gate, we will be interested. And he wrote us a support letter that got us MI phase 1 and NSF SBR phase 1. So that was the most, I think, like a most useful interview, I would say. And yeah, he clearly articulated the value propositions that we never thought about. So for example, because the travelers, due to COVID, the travelers were not actually using any services which involved human touch. So that's why the airports wanted to increase their non-aeronautical revenue by delivering food to the travelers at that gate. In addition to that, a lot of travelers have travel anxiety. So once they clear the security, they just directly go to the gate and never move. So this kind of problems, we never thought about the values that our robots can provide, and that we got from that interview. So I would say, yeah, that was the most useful interview.
Where was that airport?
CVG International. Cincinnati.
Which is where? Oh, Cincinnati. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Oh, that's great. And so you've got an MII phase 1, and you've got a
NSF SBI phase
an NSF SBIR phase 1. So that totals over $300,000, right?
Yes, yes.
Awesome. That's great. Derek, anything sort of specific interviews?
It's been a while, a couple years since I did all the interviews with my students. I don't really remember any specific interview that like went 180 from our hypothesis, but we definitely were able to sharpen. We went in pretty broad. We went in with a lot of ideas, and by talking to folks, we were really able to sharpen, I think, the hypothesis and the value proposition to something that seemed to have value, that seemed to be a gap in the existing technology, state of the art, and something that we could definitely get traction on here, on the development side. And so that process of kind of starting with the shotgun approach and kind of fleshing out what's already out there, what already exists, what are people interested in, and which of the available remaining problems would be suitable for us. That's the value that I think we got out of the process.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Jesse, Tim, do you have any questions for these folks? I have more questions, but since it's a small group, I'd love to give you a chance to ask anything.
Sure. I got a small one. When John was talking about sort of the difference in what local firefighting and maybe regional firefighting departments are looking for versus what Parliament might set as their goals and sort of the higher level and sort of headline-based needs, and trying to identify that, is that something that any of you have found in your experience translates to other large kind of organizations or companies, like in terms of, obviously government's very different from something like an Intel or an Amazon, but do you sort of is it worthwhile to kind of if you can get interviews and try to get a sense of what employees there are talking about versus, does it kind of make sense to look for low level information like that?
I've got my own answer, but John, you want to start?
Well, I mean, I think so. You're looking for market fit, right? So I think it's important to get in at different levels too, to understand kind of the sort of the supply chain of all of this. I think if I understand your question correctly, I think that if you go after kind of a market or a niche market and looking at, you're right, it's who do you talk to, or where do you go? Do you go lower? Do you go higher? I think you can hit all levels. You really kind of want to get to the user that has the pain, and then also the person who pays for that pain or for the gain. And I think that it's a lot of trial and error to see who you get to, and it's a lot. These interviews aren't just asking them questions. It's also trying to get information from them. Hopefully they'll tell you, you should talk to this person, you should go up, but this group over here, will tell you that information. I don't know if that answers your question.
So just to make sure I understand, it would the person who will sort of who might have the most insight is, if I'm understanding the pain or gain element, the person who's responsible to such a degree that they have an acute sense of the problems that are holding sort of their piece of even a larger organization or a larger structure back. Right. So it's not going to be necessarily a person with next to no responsibility for others, or doesn't have a particularly demanding higher up to answer to, but it's also not going to be the person at a sufficiently high level that maybe they're a little abstracted from those more kind of concrete niches that a startup could actually address, or a smaller group could address.
Yeah, I don't know, and Dan, maybe you have it, but I don't know if there's one set answer, but you try to get into a person who has intimate feeling of the pain or something that can be gained, right? Based on your hypothesis, at least that's what we did. And if you hit that person and they have both the responsibility and the pain, and also have the ability to buy, because you're trying to see if people will buy, buy a solution to their problems or help them. If this is the right person at the level, people can say all the time, yeah, this would be great, they'd want it, but they're not willing to pay for it, or they have no money. So I think maybe they don't have money, but maybe you go up the chain to the people who do, or maybe it's a supplier to them that has the money in the different market. So it's you got to maneuver.
A critical part of the process is defining roles that people have in your ecosystem. You're building an ecosystem of a business model in a customer ecosystem, and defining and looking for patterns among who are the decision makers, who are people who decide to adopt new technology. are they also the ones who, pay? Are they really the buyer, or is that is there some other like procurement department that is involved in purchasing in a complex industrial ecosystem? And who uses the technology? What influence do they have on the decision? There's the regulatory factor, and I've seen lots of teams, operating in regulated environments. And you want to identify each one of those stakeholders, interview many of them, and look for examples of their past behavior, because you might show them some cool innovation. And like the 3 teams here, they all have really great innovations. And you can show it to somebody, and that person might say, hey, that's really neat. I would love to have one of those. That doesn't mean that there's a market need. And it doesn't mean that their past behavior demonstrates that they're going to go and allocate a certain amount of money to try to solve a certain problem. And so you really want to try to go with an open-ended, an open mind, and asking open-ended questions around how they've tried to solve things in the past, so that you can learn about how are they involved in making decisions historically, how much money do they spend trying to solve problems, what problems have they prioritized historically, which is all very different from asking somebody to speculate on something that would be cool or something that they would enjoy. And so that's sort of the rigor of the process. I don't know how well that answers your question, but like healthcare is a really good example of a very, very complex ecosystem where if you're bringing a surgical tool to market, there's the role of the surgeon and the role of the nurses and the patients, but the hospitals all have these large panels, these committees that approve new instruments and new technologies. And there's many people on that committee, and they have different roles, right? They have different criteria and different priorities. And you have to solve all of them. Any one of them might sabotage adoption of your thing because it doesn't improve the outcome that they're looking for, whether it's patient outcomes or financial performance or whatever, and other efficiencies. So there's lots of moving parts, and the goal of I-Corps is to really try to map that out in a detailed way. Jesse, does that help answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Part of what I had in mind is it's not really in the commercialization sphere, but when kind of working with new partners, getting a sense of who is both defining the actual problem spaces they care about, but separate from that, who actually has the power to be able to, for instance, get funding for a given project are very different things. So that's kind of where my question was coming from.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the big funding agencies, TEDCO here in Maryland, NSF, and other major federal funding agencies that support technology startups, largely through SBIR, the best non-dilutive funding is going to be here in Maryland, MII, or SBIRs federally, and they are looking more and more for really compelling commercialization plans. And UTSAV just wrote one. Right, and it came from finding a very specific need that really represents a beachhead market in a sort of immediate opportunity. And there might be some things going on in Congress and some regulatory pressures around COVID or transportation that make what he's doing sort of appealing long term. But I'm sure that that testimonial and that letter that he got around this immediate, concrete, tangible need that represents a beachhead market, and his ability to back that up with the 99 other interviews that sort of supported what some immediate revenue opportunities would be, that allowed him to go get this non-dilutive funding. He hasn't even gotten to the non-dilutive, talking to VCs yet, but this is the path that he's on. We're actually running low on time. Tim, did you have any questions?
No, this has all been all very interesting, but I don't have any questions.
All right. I want to share with everybody how they can engage in I-Corps. Utsav, Derek, John, any final kind of comments for the others, or just sort of just comments about sort of the value of engaging, or more importantly, how it's informed like your other things, how you think about your subsequent projects and research and stuff.
So like other than finding a product market fit, this program also helped us to get an advisor on board. So during our interviews only, we connected with Director of Innovation at Seattle International Airport, and he's currently our advisor. So he's helping our team to commercialize this technology. He's helping with the all the regulatory issues, like what we need to resolve before before selling this product. On top of that, like whatever technology we were developing, there were lots of other needs in the market that we never considered. For example, social compliance is a huge factor when you are deploying robots in public spaces. So that gave us a new research direction. So in that way as well, this program helped us a lot. So that's something I wanted to add.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, I guess I would jump in and just say that I think that there is a certain expectation of people that before they even participate, let's say in regional I-Corps, that they need to have a pretty mature business product or model or some kind of, intellectual property or something. And so I would just emphasize that there's value in participating even before you have any of those things. Because, I really took to heart the definition of a startup that I think is a temporary organization in search of a business model or something like that. And so it wasn't until that very moment on the first day of I-Corps that I realized, hey, we have a startup. That's kind of cool. So I think that's what I would emphasize, is that even if you're not sure where you are in the process, you can start I-Corps wherever you are. And you'll get out of it whatever you put into it. So if you do 3 interviews, you may not get a whole lot out of it. But if you actually get through the 20 interviews, I think you start to see some signal in the noise.
Yeah, and I think one of the side effects too that's helpful, especially for engineers, is that a lot of times it's difficult for engineers to kind of talk at the business problem solution level, right? It's everybody we get excited about the technology and algorithms and different things that we've built, but ultimately, it's not it is about that, but it's not about that to the customer, right? It's about, well, how are you going to solve their problems or help them? And when you talk to them in the interviews, it forces you to think about how they're talking about the problem, and also forces you to learn about how they talk about it, and to talk less about the details and the technology and more about the solution. And it's a really good. It's good for all engineers to understand this, but it takes a while. It's hard, and some people just I think don't see the value in that. But that's a true part of the value of the program.
Awesome. You're all awesome evangelists for I-Corps. I really appreciate you being here, and I'd like to include all of you in the next thing that we do, supporting Artemis I-Corps, which is coming up. So just real quick, some opportunities for all of you to engage in I-Corps. The next cohort we have, we're running it in conjunction with Morgan State. You're all encouraged to consider it. I think the dates just got posted today. If not, they will definitely be posted in a day or so on our website. I'll share the links, but it's in the bottom of, it's one of the 2 links in the bottom of my screen here at the UMD I-Corps website. So the next cohort starts October 21st. The one after that is January 6th. So if you're really busy in October with like teaching or classes or whatever, and you want to do it, often the January cohorts are really good because they end usually before classes start at the end of January. They run about 2 weeks each. So those are the next 2 that are coming up. And if you wait until early February, we're going to work on an Artemis specific cohort where we're going to bring people from industry to the Artemis annual event. Hopefully, this is what we're conceptualizing, and facilitate customer discovery on the spot with industry contacts who we will bring to the cohort, and we'll sort of do a mini I-Corps workshop right there. Hopefully, we'll be able to pull something like that off. And John, Utsav, Derek, hopefully you can help me brainstorm a little bit on that and get the most value out of that. We'd love to use you as a sounding board and talk that through. So that is it for me. I think we got in with a few minutes to spare. And we'd love to see, the three of you who have done it before, if you could share it with your other, co-investigators, other folks from the ArtIAMAS network and other, entrepreneurs and researchers you're working with, please send them our way. Share these dates with us. And then Jesse and Tim, if you want to consider I-Corps, we'd love to see you there. As Derek was saying, you don't have to have a particularly sophisticated or developed idea. You can come in sort of exploring an opportunity. For sure, and share it with your colleagues and researchers as well. It's available to everybody. So that's it for me. Anybody have any final questions or comments? Glenn, Jennifer, did I forget anything that I usually share? No, I'm good. All right.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all the panelists.
Thank you, everyone. This was
Thank you
really
all.
interesting.
Thank you all. All right, great.